Welcome back. Today we're going to do a update on the rear axle for the Chevy Nova since it's back from the manufacturer for modification, and also do a review video of the Holley Sniper EFI fuel tank. A quick note before we get started. First off, I apologize for being gone for a few months. Had a lot going on, had to go overseas for a little bit, but I'm back now trying to get some work done on the Nova. Also, this video is going to be a little bit choppier, maybe not as smooth as my videos normally try to be. It was recorded over the course of several months and several different takes. Trying to keep it as tight as I can. I'll try and fix as much of it in the editing process as possible. I didn't want to do a video just on the rear axle because it just wasn't enough information, so I'm including it in here with this gas tank video. I'm not doing a build video on this gas tank. It's not that complicated, but there are some factors that I wanted to cover because it's good information to have if you are considering one of these Holley gas tanks. So hang in there, let's get it started. The rear axle for the Nova was gone a bit over 2 months at Strange Engineering to get chopped back down because it was set up to be a 72 Camaro rear width when it's meant for a 72 Nova. So they chopped off about an inch or so from the width of the rear axle to make it to where it would actually fit underneath my Nova. It was also supposed to get a new differential installed. While it was there, it was supposed to get swapped from a 355 rear axle ratio to a 390. I checked it and it did not get swapped. So I think I'm going to, at this point, just go ahead and say the 355 rear axle ratio is good enough, get the money back that I paid them to complete the swap, and move on with the build the best I can. It may actually not be such a bad thing. A 350 SS Nova and even the Novas that ended up with the 396 big block in them maxed out at 375 horsepower, at least from the factory and the dealerships that sold them. Whereas the engine that I have for this Nova, the 427 cubic inch LS3 engine, is 620 horsepower. But since I didn't tub the rear end, I'm still limited to 275 millimeter wide rear tires. So traction is going to be a bit of an issue, and this 355 rear axle ratio should help me maintain traction, whereas with the 390, there's definitely a higher chance that this thing would just be a burnout machine. So let's see what we can do with this thing. And we've got another project to work on today, dealing with the Holley fuel injection gas tank that I have for this. Speaking real quick about the Holley gas tanks, they offer two different gas tanks for the Gen 3 Chevy Novas. There's a 250 liter per hour version that can support up to a 550 horsepower EFI limit. And then they also offer a 400 liter per hour version to support up to 700 horsepower through EFI. My big question is, if you look around online, you can see that a 700 horsepower engine, generally they recommend a 1/2-inch fuel line. So I do kind of wonder why Holley decided to have a 1/4 inch outlet for both of these fuel pumps. It seems to me that it would be a lot easier to keep those fuel lines full and not have to run a very high pressure in the fuel pump if they had just increased the 400 liter per hour version to a 3/8 or even preferably a 1/2-inch outlet. But that's just how they designed it. They're the engineers, not me. So we have this Holley Sniper EFI gas tank, obviously from Holley Manufacturing. It came really well packaged. You can see the boxes back here. It comes in a large box marked from Holley, and then the gas tank itself comes wrapped in plastic, but it's in a second box from Tanks Incorporated, whatever it is, inside of that package. And then inside the box, there's also the filler neck, the straps to hang the gas tank, the fuel sending unit, and another set of boxes that's got more parts in them for all the filters and, you know, the fuel tank sending unit and all that sort. I had to cut off the bottom portion of the bracket on the fuel sending unit, put the rheostat as high up on the bracket as it would go. The instructions said that I only needed to use the bottom screw and the top screw wasn't necessary, but I was able to fit it in since the tank is 7 inches deep, and this still lets me get the center of the fuel sender pivot down to the 3.5 inch plus an extra 1/8 for the thickness of the gasket point that it needs to be at. So that's where we are. I also had to cut down the length of this arm for the fuel sender to the proper length for the tank. Currently I am trying to install this little sock on the bottom of the fuel pump. Nothing's mentioned in the instructions, but they give you this tiny little 6-sided little washer that goes on there, and I'm trying to get it on there the best I can, but nothing was mentioned about it in the instructions, and it is not exactly the easiest item to put on. Okay, so that completes the assembly of the 2 major components of the Holley Sniper EFI fuel system. We have the fuel sender here with its little float that is cut to fit my particular size tank. I had to chop the bottom of this bracket off and mount this rheostat as high up on the bracket as it would go, but I was able to use both mounting screws so it's as secure as possible, and then trim this float down to fit the tank properly. So it will read, you know, basically if we figure this is where its little hole is, it'll read empty at the bottom and it'll read full up at the top. And then we also have the fuel pump assembly, which has its little sock down here at the bottom and a couple zip ties. I may have to trim this. I saw in another set of the instructions that on this model of pump, you actually have to cut the return line off above this wide portion on the bottom of the fuel pump. Otherwise, it won't fit through the opening in the filler cap. So just caught an issue, luckily, before it became a bigger issue. But the instructions say to measure from the bottom of the sock to the top of the fuel pump, and then subtract that measurement from the length of the supply line and make that measurement equal the entire depth of your fuel tank. So I'm dealing with 7 inches. The height of the pump and sock was, 5¼ inches or whatever. And so I cut the supply line to 1¼ inch to make 7 inches. However, what I didn't pay attention to, and why I'm going to have to redo this now, is I did not measure to the top of this fuel pump. I measured to the top of the inlet, which would be all well and good, except for the supply line and that, actually it's the outlet on the fuel pump overlap. So now this fuel pump sits about 1/2 inch too high in the fuel tank. It's an easy enough fix. I cut all this supply line off. I just need to remove this supply line and move it down, and I was going to have to cut part of this return line off anyway. So not the end of the world. I'm also going to have to loosen up these pinch nuts that are on these wires so I don't strip them out. So take me a few minutes, but not the end of the world. But make sure when you guys make your measurements that you measure to the top of the fuel pump, not to the top of the fuel pump outlet. Hey, John from the future here, and there's a couple things that I wanted to include in this video that I didn't get a couple days ago when I was working on this. First off, the instructions from Holley, they're decent. Some of them are kind of redundant. They give you a couple pages that cover the information for the fuel sender that basically repeat the same thing. Then they give you a couple pages that repeat the same thing about assembling the fuel pump. And then there's a couple just generic pages about the overall construction, how to run the vent lines and everything for the fuel tank itself. However, what these instructions don't include, besides properly measuring the pump to be able to get the sock and the depth proper in here, they could be a little bit more clear about that, is there's a little insulation sleeve, probably to help mitigate some of the noise from this electric fuel pump in the tank, that they don't specifically mention when to put it on. It's pretty obvious when to put it on, but they don't actually mention it in the assembly instructions. And the only time it's actually mentioned is in the picture where it says pump with sleeve. And you know, the pictures show it with the sleeve, but they never actually say at what point do you go ahead and put it on. It's pretty obvious you need to put it on before you put the zip ties on, but they didn't include that. It's just an oversight in their instructions to keep an eye out for. Additionally, they recommend to go out and get Permatex 85420 in order to help these gaskets seal. So I'm going to deal with that here in a little bit. Maybe this is more of a quality control issue. The bolt holes that are in the top of the fuel gauge sender do not line up properly with the threaded inserts that are in the top of the fuel tank. So I had to come out here with my trusty Dremel the other day and kind of oblong those holes a little bit and make it to where I would actually be able to line the bolts up. So that's another quality issue. I just wanted to make sure you guys know there's always a little bit of figuring things out and tinkering with these kinds of projects. Nothing ever seems to go together perfectly as planned. The instructions always have a little bit of problems. The equipment doesn't quite line up all the time. You pretty much always have to be able to think on your feet and adapt as necessary. But you will definitely have to be able to do that a little bit with this Holley fuel system, which is somewhat disappointing because I was hoping that this would be a well thought out, well executed kit for the amount of money spent on it. But I would have to say this has been a little bit less than impressive at this point. Okay, so here is the Holley Sniper EFI fuel tank for the 72 and I think 70 and 71 Chevy Novas in all of its completed glory. Although wiring is done from the fuel pump, it still needs a positive and a negative lead from the fuel gauge. I'll deal with that later as I continue building the car. I went ahead and set up the vent system with the vent from the pump, the vent from the tank. They go off into a Y, which leads to this check valve. It's got a little BB in it, so it can basically breathe in and breathe out as needed so the tank doesn't explode or implode. But if it, for hopefully no reason, ever gets rolled upside down, that check valve will go ahead and seal it off. I don't have the fuel spout in it right now. I'll do that after I go ahead and install this thing into the car, but right now I'll leave it off for ease of installation. The Holley kit also comes with these tank mounting straps new, which I guess is kind of nice. I wasn't going to reuse the old ones anyway, so it's nice that this kit came with them. One change I did make is this is actually a 5/16 inch stainless steel Y from Amazon. I didn't want to use this little plastic one that Holley gives you. It seems pretty flimsy, and I didn't want it dealing with gasoline vapors and cracking or anything like that. So this was a couple bucks on Amazon. Got the fuel line from Amazon as well for the vacuum lines. I know fuel line isn't vacuum line, but vacuum line isn't fuel line either, and this is going to be dealing with fuel vapors. A couple things I wanted to address first about this Holley Nova gas tank. The first problem is it's not really a Holley product to begin with. It shows up in a Holley box. Holley sells it. Holley makes money off it, but it's actually marked on the tank as being from Tanks in parentheses, and the box inside of the Holley box is also from Tanks in parentheses. And I forget what the box said. I don't think I took any pictures of it. I'll look through my old footage, but it's from Taiwan or China or something like that. Holley just buys it from them, marks it up, I'm sure, a hefty sum, and then sells it to people here in the United States. So it's not really a Holley designed and manufactured item. Additionally, Holley markets this tank as being able to flow 400 liters per hour and support up to 750 horsepower. However, if you look around online, in order to support 750 horsepower through a fuel injected system which needs a supply and a return line, it's generally accepted that you need at least a AN6 fuel line, preferably a AN8. However, this Holley system only comes with a 1/4 inch NPT, which is a AN4 outlet for both the return and the supply lines, which is pretty undersized. I'm not very happy about that. So this led me to try and get a 1/4 NPT to 8 AN adapter to put in here. But with the clearance from the top of the fuel pump plate and how low these outlets were, I had to grind off the corners of this adapter to try and get it to where I could even spin it. And even with those ground off, I had a hard time trying to actually torque this down inside of the fuel pump. And then it got to the point where it was screwed far enough in, but I had to worry about, like, will I now be able to even screw the fuel line onto the AN portion of this adapter. So I ended up going down to a 1/4 NPT to a AN6 adapter, which turns the inner diameter down. Instead of being a 0.39 inner diameter, a 0.39 inch inner diameter, down to a 0.29 inner diameter. So I'm just barely above 1/4 of an inch once again. Better than nothing, but I really think this is kind of a poor solution. Point of all this being, Holley should be doing better if they want to establish themselves as this premier brand within the classic car, muscle car, hot rod kind of space. But additionally, what other alternatives are there out there? And I think maybe the better alternative would have been for me to go with the Aeromotive fuel tank setup. They have one. It costs quite a bit more. I paid about $750 for this fuel tank from Holley on one of their never-ending sales about a year ago. Now they're listed at about $850, but you can still get them on sale right now for about $760 through Summit. The Aeromotive alternative, which comes with a AN6 outlet and is designed to run with a AN6 system the whole way through, is $1,200. I think it's $1,227 for their tank and pump and sender system, which is quite a bit more expensive than Holley's $750, $850. But if it keeps you from frying your engine, it's definitely a worthwhile extra $400 or $500. So something to keep in mind. Anyhow, that's all I have for you guys today. Oh, no, it's not. One more thing. So dealing with all of these fuel fittings that I've been getting into lately, I wanted to make sure I could get everything sealed because we don't want to have leaking fuel lines. And I got down the rabbit hole of, should you use Teflon tape on fuel lines? And it turns out, no, you shouldn't. Teflon tape, as good as it is for sealing up pipes, does not stand up long-term to fuel use. Fuel, as we know, it's a great thing for melting plastics and eating into things and just cleaning random items around the shop, but it eats Teflon over time. It breaks up the Teflon tape. So I started looking around for alternatives online, and I found out that there's a material called Petro Tape Nickel from a company called Jet Lube. This is what their stuff looks like, so you can find it online. I love trying to get cameras to focus. Anyway, Jet Lube Petro Tape Nickel. There's not a whole lot of places that sell this. You can see it's got a grayer look than the Teflon tape. It's also a little bit thicker, which makes it a little bit tougher to use at times. But anyway, not a whole lot of places carry it. I found one place that was a distributor, but they wanted me to buy like 100 rolls of it, which I wouldn't use in an entire lifetime. But I found a place in Houston, Texas, so pretty local to me, called Industrial Stop that allowed me to buy a couple rolls of it without any crazy charges. Let's see, my whole invoice ended up being, well, apparently this isn't my invoice, but it was pretty cheap. I think I got it all shipped to my house and everything for about 30 bucks for 3 rolls. Anyway, their phone number is 1-888-534-0956. You can email them at support@industrialstop.com. They didn't pay me to say this. I just think it's a good product. I used it on the drain and fill bolts for my new differential cover. Anything that basically comes in contact with petroleum and you need it to seal, it's a good option. And I don't think a whole lot of people know about it. I hadn't heard about it before, and I've been screwing with cars for a couple decades now. Maybe it can help you guys out. So anyway, you guys take care. I'm going to try and get this video edited and get it up on the interwebs here pretty soon. You guys take care, and I'll talk to you later.